Now, one of the major problems we talk about when we talk about the education of black children, and I'm sure when you deal with the education of many of our people, is this present-orientedness, concerned with the immediate, being unable to motivate students in terms of your future. Well, you need to know this math because, you see, but if I can't see an immediate reward from it, I don't see any point in studying it. You say, oh, that's 4 years down the road. Oh, that's 10 years down the road. I don't need to deal with that now. I want to solve this problem tonight. I want these sneakers tomorrow. I want this Shirley jacket. I want this 8-ball jacket. You see, I'm dealing with trying to be popular in my class, being accepted, being the fashion plate. This is what makes me feel good. This is what makes me feel accepted. This is what gives me the sense of power. This is what gives me a sense of control over my environment. This brings me attention, admiration, and so forth. Don't bother me with the future. But look at what happens here. Being robbed of the past, and under paternalistic racism, being robbed of responsibility for your future. What is it? White folk are going to solve our future problems. So what do you have then? A people thrown where? Into the immediate present, who are then disconnected both from the future and from the past. When one is solving problems realistically, one must solve those problems in terms of cause and effects, in terms of relationships, in terms of doing something presently so that one can create a future and not be victimized by it. But you must have a sound sense of relations and cause and effect kind of thinking. But people who are so caught up in their symptoms and relief of the symptoms do not develop these kinds of thinking skills. And therefore the neurotic paradox, that paradox where the individual, despite his suffering, despite his disappointments, despite his failings, continues to do the same thing over and over again, is the result of the fact that the individual is basically concerned with immediate relief from anxiety, and being focused on immediate relief and being focused on immediate symptomatic concerns has an inadequate perception of reality, and consequently learns very little and maintains the original behavior. And what am I saying here then, ladies and gentlemen, in a political sense? As long as we get caught up with housing as a central problem, see, or even with education as a central problem, or criminal justice as a central problem, or white racism as a central problem per se, we're going to see that those problems will never go away. They will always just change form and shape, and we'll have to fight them in new shapes and new forms over and over again, and we'll make the same mistakes again and again and again. The African man has been struggling with the European now for the last 2,000 to 5,000 years. And when you look at a Chancellor Williams book or other books, you will see, and that book of course is about what? Africans making what? The same mistakes over and over and over again, right to the point of the Persian Gulf. A continuous line of mistakes, indicative of people then not having learned. Let's look then at imperialism, which I see as a root problem. When we talk about racism, remember, it takes a race to engage in it, doesn't it? Right? You know, most people kind of talk about racism in a disembodied form. You know, in terms of what? An attitude. Now that's one abstraction that works against us, doesn't it? Yeah. But racism has to be practiced by a race of people. And it's important we keep that in mind. Why are whites racist? Because they have the power to be racist. Period. Now you can go into all kinds of psychological, psychobabble you want to behind all of that. But that's the bottom line of it. They have the power to be. And when you get through explaining all of their psyche to them, you know, and going through all of your changes and trying to stroke them with guilt and bring them into confrontation with their constitution so they can live out their creed. When you get through with all of that and whining and complaining about how he mistreated you and hurt you and made you all kinds of, you know, whatever you complaining about, in the end he'll just say, yes, you're right. So what are you going to do about it? You find yourself right back in the same shape. What are you going to do about it? Yes, I kicked you and colonialized you. Yes, I enslaved you. Yeah, I'm sending your boys to Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I'm going to make them fight and shoot and do all the things. Yeah, I'm going to make them kill each other out in the street. What are you going to do about it? We want to change your attitude. You could change my attitude. You might change it for a minute, but when I feel like it, I'm just going to flip right back into it. What are you going to do about it? But see, it's easier for us to pretend that it's the attitude and, you know, and get caught up in all of that analysis because we don't want to confront the reality of power. And we don't want to confront the reality that all of these problems that we complain about, homelessness, poor education, all of this, comes out of one reality, and that is the white man's ability to impose these problems upon us. And the solution being what? What is it? What is the solution? Abstract now, tell me.
Elimination.
To eliminate what?
Race.
That's one possibility. And it may be one that's necessary. May be one that's necessary. But most of all, if racism flows from the power to be racist, then what must we eliminate? That power. We must neutralize the power. That is the bottom of all the rest of the crap. We would not be in the condition we were in if the white man didn't have the power to what? Put us there. We wouldn't be hollering about injustice, he'd be hollering about it. And all the other stuff. If he didn't have the power to be unjust. And yet there seems to be a refusal on most of our parts to confront the reality of that situation. And to recognize, ladies and gentlemen, that if you are not about breaking the arms of the white man's power, you're just kidding yourself and you're going to suffer and you're going to get the suffering that you deserve. And I can tell, I can feel even this little tension right here. Every time I talk about power, I get this little silence. You see, because somehow our old biblical training and all of this other nonsense that we've been taught makes us think that power is a dirty word, but it's the only thing that keeps you alive. Power is given to man as a survival tool. It is not sinful in and of itself. One cannot protect himself or feed himself or plow the earth or do anything else without what? Power. and without the ability to be aggressive. And somehow black folks sitting in these churches have been made to think then that it is wrong to talk about power and to cultivate power in a deliberate and conscious way. And imperialism involves then the power of one distinct group over another group, in essence to control the resources of that group, to control the political structure and behavior of that group, to control the authority of that group. White supremacy is just that. The supremacy of whites over blacks, and maintaining that supremacy through power, and using that power to the advantage of white people. George Frederickson, in his book White Supremacy, defines it as referring to the attitudes, ideologies, and policies associated with the rise of blatant forms of white or European dominance over non-white populations. Another interesting book I think we should read in this context is one that's called Portraits of Racism by David T. Well, and I like it because it's very straightforward and doesn't get into a lot of psychological mumbo-jumbo. According to David T. Wellman, that's the name, racism can be seen to systematically provide economic, political, psychological, and social advantages for whites at the expense of blacks and other people of color. Keep that in mind. I want you to keep that in mind. Because we kind of forget. We talk about racism and slips off our tongue so easily, you see. But you have to remember, racism is not merely an attitude. It is a system. And the point of that system is to give material and non-material advantages to the race that is empowered to practice it. Dr. Wells has put out a nice little book here, The ISIS Papers. Interesting material there. Intriguing explanations. Psychoanalytic. Genetic explanations. That's good. Thank you. No problem there. Thank you. But often when you explain a problem, try, if you can, to give an explanation that has in it an implied, what? Program. You see? A good explanation, and I'm not saying she does not have that, but a good explanation is one that has an implied program. It becomes interesting to say that the white man oppresses the black man because perhaps the white man sees the black man's penis as being larger. What kind of solution does that suggest? That black men shrink themselves? I don't think that's a viable solution. Or to protect one's genetic pool, that's a viable explanation in a way. Or that they keep us subordinated because they believe we have a lower IQ. But realize this, ladies and gentlemen, these whites are going to oppress us whether we have little penises or big penises. They're going to oppress us whether our IQ is larger or smaller. The issue then is not one of the discussing of IQs and discussing whether an IQ test is culturally oriented or whether it is really true that black men are bigger than white men, and hoping then by showing that they are actually the same size that then the white men will stop oppressing black men. Forget that. It is enough that white men get material wealth from oppressing black men. Power and what? Prestige from oppressing black men. Comfort from oppressing black men. We don't have to go into the underwear. We don't have to go into the jeans. Hey, I'm living well. And I want to what? Keep living well. And if that means putting my foot on your neck, that's what I'm going to do. It doesn't matter if I have no penis. That's the deal. So, it's good and it's intriguing. There's a lot to that and it explains a lot. But then at the same time, we have to keep focus on some things here. What is it? That racism provides economic, political, psychological, and social advantages. And it is highly unlikely that whites are going to be what? Persuaded out of those advantages by any attitude change or anything. The determining feature of race relations is not prejudice toward blacks, but rather the superior position of whites and institutions, ideological as well as structural, which maintain it. I'm going to run through here because that's more that I keep in within time. Racism is more effectively analyzed then as a strategy for the maintenance of the privilege rather than as prejudice. I've talked before to people about how in the future we're going to have what I call faceless racism. C.O.W.S in his study of white racism talks about meta-racism. When the racial attitudes of whites will not be readily apparent. They won't call you dirty names. They'll be nice to you. You can live next to them, sleep next, but you're going to still have the problem of trying to figure out why are we still where? On the bottom. Why, after all of this desegregation and, fair housing laws and all of these other things, integration of schools and the whole bit, are our people still down and out and suffering and on the point of annihilation? If we view racism as a culturally sanctioned rational response, now I want you to understand, a rational response, because a lot of people want to define racism as what? Some irrational, hate-filled orientation. You don't have to define it that way. Rational response to struggles over scarce resources. What are we saying here? There ain't enough for everybody. And I'm going to what? Get mine. And getting mine involves putting my foot on your neck. And I am thinking in perfectly what? Logical, rational terms. Period. And I am not crazy. I am not irrational. I am saying I want to feed my children first. I want to clothe my family. I want to stay out of the cold. I want other people doing all the hard work and the whole bit. And hey, both of us can't live this way. And I know who I want to live this way. Straightforward. Straightforward. But we refuse to deal with it that way. We refuse to deal with it in our own communities this way. Here we are unemployed as a people. And we are feeding other ethnic groups. It's not about racism. It's about the fact that our black men and women are unemployed. It's about the fact that the industries have left America and been shipped out of the country, so that the jobs black men used to have and women used to have are no longer there. They're just not there. The Ford Motor Company plants have left Detroit, and Detroit is suffering and falling in on itself. The Midwest is falling in on itself. What can we do? You see, again, we don't look at it that way. I'm saying to us as people often, we should think about just not buying any more Ford products. I'm not buying any more GM products. And say, until you put that plant back into Detroit or you do something here, we're not going to support your racism. We're not going to support what you're running on. But let's look at it more closely. Despite the fact now that these men and women have been bumped from these jobs, we still let other groups sit in our community and take out money by the tons. And our wealth It's just sucked right out of the community, and it keeps the other people's children out of trouble, keeps them out of crime. We literally subsidize the other children and children of other people out of crime. We literally pay for the criminality of our own children. And we do it behind some crazy moral code. I don't see color. I treat everybody alike. That's the Christian thing to do. If you don't see color, then you can't see your own black children suffering. And not all children are suffering to the same extent. And when you treat them all the same, you're giving money to kids who don't what? Need it. And therefore, in a way, your moral principle supports sin and subsidizes sin and crime. Because the truly honest and moral person is discriminating in their giving and discriminating in their support. Non-discrimination is not a moral approach to the situation. Yet we let these churches deceive us into this kind of stuff and make us think then not to see color is the best way to go. And then we wonder why our children attack us at night and attack us during the day. Yeah, this game is on. Let's look at the resources. Either the Africans are going to have access to those resources on their continent, or the Europeans are going to have it. And the Europeans are not going to turn it loose in the name of any kind of moral principle or constitutional principle or any other brotherhood principle or any other thing you're thinking about. They love the life they live too well. That's why Bush talks about the American way of life. And we're going to defend it. And that's why he's telling these Arabs, we want this gas, we want it at this price, we want to set the prices you sell it for, and if we had to make war on you and conquer you militarily or control you with the permanent army over there, that's exactly what we are going to do. A rational response, thought out objectively, not as a result of neurosis, but of saying, this is what we want and this is how we get it. We can account for it then, for its widespread character, we're talking about the so-called racism, and avoid the inconsistencies and meaningless distinction that arise when it is viewed as prejudice. In other words, then, we have to stop looking at racism as an attitude, but as a strategy for one race gaining a material and other advantage over a race. And we will see then, that is why, when we make one move in one direction, these whites have a new rationale in the other direction to maintain us in the same situation that we are in. Whatever the nature of imperialism or white supremacy, they are consistently designed to exploit in some way the subordinate population. Why engage in imperialism if your point is not what? To exploit the subordinate population. It has no point then. Why engage in white supremacy if it is not to use and abuse and take advantage of the subordinate population? Imperialism can and does vary from direct military suppression, concentration camps, forced labor, slave labor, peonage, wage slavery, martial law, curfews, passes, religious conversion, desegregation, neocolonialism, tokenism, on and on and on it goes. But it has one constant. No matter what ism it is, it's designed to do what? Exploit the subordinate population. And you have to keep that in mind. But whatever form it takes, whatever evil it perpetrates on the subordinate population is deliberate and intentional. Whatever good it does is purely coincidental. Okay? Functional and tenuous. I say that for you Negroes who made progress. You know, who got some good jobs. There's no contradiction there. It's another form of neocolonialism. We give you a good job so you can help us what? Keep the natives in line. Confuse them. Deceive them. You're not made any gains. You're part of the whole system. And when we no longer need you in those jobs, what are we going to do? Knock you out of them. A colleague of mine was talking to me about a bus driver friend of his who is now retiring, and he was trying to get him to understand how important adequate power was to his getting. Well, that didn't help me in no way. I took this test myself. He didn't take this test for me. You know, short-sighted like many of our people are. And now he's ready to retire with his Lincoln car, and he's going to California. He's going to lay back. You know, he just assumes that those pension checks will still come. You know, he hasn't thought about the possibility that these writers could say, hey man, you worked for us 50 years, so what? You're not getting any more checks. What are you going to do about it? Yeah, he don't think about that. He doesn't think about the fact that he is going to need power, and black people will need power to defend themselves against that possibility, which does occur. Freedom National Bank, guaranteed by the federal government. Okay, we'll be with you in a minute. Right? Okay, what? Hey, man, we're just going to give you 50 cents on the dollar. Go to the Bank of New England the other day. We're going to pay everything you got. Oh, what happened? Because we are able to do it, Negro. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. Yeah, let's forget it for what it is. We don't want to deal with it. So what you have and what you have gained under this system is purely tenuous and coincidental to its operation. It in no way means that it is permanent, nor does it mean it's going to stay with you forever and ever, as in a fairy tale. It can be taken and used. Every year I try to review a little bit here, Lerone Bennett's book, piece in the Ebony magazine of October 1981, where he talks about the second Reconstruction. Because we've been down this road before, haven't we, ladies and gentlemen? What did he say? Let's read this to Julius William Wilson, to Thomas Sowell, to, what's the boy, Steele, Walter Williams. Let's read this to them again. At long last, over and done with. How could anyone doubt it? How could anyone fail to see that the race problem had been solved forever? Julius Wilson, writing about the declining significance of race. It's no longer a problem of race. We've heard this before 100 years ago. You know, we weren't aware of this. This game went on 100 years ago. What did it say? One man had no doubts said, all distinctions founded upon race or color have been forever abolished in the United States. Another who saw things this way said the category of race had been abolished by law, and there were no more colored people in this country. Thus spoke the dreamers and prophets and victims in the first Reconstruction of the 1860s and 1870s. So we've been down this road before, and we shouldn't forget it. And it is worth emphasizing here that at the very beginning, that these flights into fantasy were based on the same hard facts that gripped the imagination of blacks in the second Reconstruction of the 1960s and 70s. That is, these people who drag out the median income figures, you know, and the educational level figures and all the other statistics that indicate clearly that race is no longer a major variable to be dealt with in the United States. We've had this game before, ladies and gentlemen. What does it say? In the 1860s and 1870s, as in the 1960s and the 1970s, there were black sheriffs and mayors in the South. There was an open speculation about a black vice presidential candidate. There was, moreover, a network of civil rights laws that seemed to settle the issue beyond all possibility of dispute or recall. Free forever, weren't we? Back there 100 years ago, there was a federal law protecting voting rights in the South. Does all this sound vaguely familiar? And there was a National Public Accommodations Act. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, there was a law that said you could ride in the front of the bus in the 1870s and 1860s. Nothing new. Before Rosa Parks, there was a law there that was present then. Such in broad outline was the racial situation 100 years ago in the 1860s and the 1870s, when racism was forever abolished in America for the first time. That it was a short forever. So what are we talking about here, ladies and gentlemen, then? That progress, when the European and the white man still has power, still has ownership of the means of production, still has overwhelming military force and political power, is only tenuous and shaky and impermanent. It is never assured. They taught us that lesson in the 18th that progress, when the European and the white man still has power, still has ownership of the means of production, still has overwhelming military force and political power, is only tenuous and shaky and impermanent. It is never assured. They taught us that lesson in the 1860s and 70s, and it looks like we'll have to learn it again. So whatever progress we've made, it is only for a little while. Ultimately, under imperialism, the subordinate race must be recruited to make war against its own interests in favor of the interests of the oppressors. If the interests of the imperialists requires the self-annihilation of the oppressed, and I want you to keep this in mind because this is where we are now, then the subordinate population, or a portion of that population, must engage in the murder of another portion of that population, or must commit suicide. When I'm writing in the book Black on Black Violence, I'm writing about that. That's why I subtitled that book, Black Self-Annihilation in Service of European Domination. That is, when the European gets to a point where he has a death wish and wish that we were dead, we will accommodate him by killing ourselves as a people. Or one segment of our population will kill another segment of the population. This is the nature of imperialism. Why have imperialist power if you cannot bring this about? What's the point of it? It's not there for fun. We have not learned because we've been symptom-oriented. We've been ego-oriented. We've been wanting to win the white man's respect through the killing of ourselves and the sacrificing of our life. Once again, black people are serving as the agents of imperialism for a nation that still despises them. And he goes back there and deals with the Civil War, the 9th Cavalry, the 10th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers. Read the October 24th, 1990 piece there. I think you'll find it informative. Look at what these regiments did as they went out and destroyed Indians. As they were put 600 miles away from the nearest town or the nearest post, so that they could be isolated away from the white populations. How they were not given leave. How they helped in the United States to steal the land of Indians while they were complaining about their 40 acres and a mule. We see the same thing going on today, again and again. The duties of the black soldiers were to prevent the Indians from marauding and to capture and confine them to their reservations, to drive these Indians off their lands, while blacks had no lands of their own. I wish we could have time to quote some of these situations here. The 7th Cavalry, a group of white men, were in danger of being overrun. They were rescued by black soldiers who had marched 108 miles through a blizzard to reach them. And these same black men are going to get hung and strung up when they finally get back home. Black soldiers seeking freedom for themselves had helped end the freedom of others. And he goes on to talk about the war in Cuba. And in what? The Philippines. Black men fighting other black men in the Philippines and taking Jim Crowism to the Philippines, to Cuba, and other places. They saw, as the writer put it, that the Jim Crow war resulted in a Jim Crow empire determined to oppress dark-skinned people at home and abroad. Black soldiers returning home from Cuba were disarmed, while in the South and left to the mercy of white killers. More of the soldiers were murdered by Southern white policemen than died in the battles in Cuba. How long, ladies and gentlemen, are we going to go through the kind of nonsense we're going through today? And again, we see this business being here. Another letter he refers to here, written by Lewis Douglas, the son of Frederick Douglass, as he talked about black people being hung, in some instances as many as 120 a day, and yet you had black soldiers out here loyal to the United States. What happened? Black men who fought in the Civil War not only helped end slavery, they also, by helping you reunite the country, made it possible for the ex-slave owners to wield more power than they ever could have wielded in the Confederacy they tried to create. So they even grew stronger. So even in the Civil War, the blood of black men helped cement the pillars of post-slavery white supremacy and further the interests of slave owners. The paradox continues. Lewis Douglas, writing the President McKinley knows that brave, loyal black American soldiers who fight and die for their country are hated, despised, and cruelly treated in that section of the country from which this administration accepts dictation and to the taste of which the president undoubtedly caters. He's referring here to the South, of course, and the North. We can't leave them out. The question will be asked, how is it that such promises of liberty and equality are made to Filipinos thousands of miles away, while the action of the administration in protecting dark citizens at home does not even extend to a promise of any attempt to rebuke the outlawry which kills American citizens of African descent for the purpose of gratifying bloodthirstiness and race hatred? How many of these soldiers will be able to walk the streets of Bensonhurst and the other areas of New York after having shed their blood in the sands of Saudi Arabia, ladies and gentlemen? And he goes on to talk about some other things that I wish I had time to talk about, but we'll just make one last quote and end it here. One of the most destructive aspects of this country's racial hiring practices is not only that they force blacks and Latinos into the military in disproportionate numbers, but that those who join have the most going for them. Understand what he's saying here? These are not, the dregs. These are the boys who did it the American way. They stayed in school. They got their education. They are living complete the American dream. They went to college to be somebody, right? To be the best that they could be. They followed our advice. And what do they get for it? The army and Saudi Arabia. They are the ones who have gone to school, stayed away from drugs and crime, and taken concrete steps to make something of their lives. But you will understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the making of something under white power necessarily involves the making of something by some black men by sacrificing the lives of other black men. I tried to tell you that when we talk about black-on-black violence, many of these men are motivated not by criminal desires and twisted motives, as these psychologists try to tell you, that they have some kind of criminal personality. Nonsense. They have the same wishes and desires you have. They are bourgeois criminals. They have bourgeois values. They want the big cars, the big houses, the fine clothes, the same one you went to college for. Come on. Tell the truth. They're motivated by that. They don't have any twisted motives. They have a desire for respect and a desire for status. Understand me? They want to be somebody. But their problem is, in the twisted state of imperialism, under the pressure of white supremacy, they are being somebody, and they are gaining respect, and they are fulfilling the American dream, has compelled them to victimize the black community, other black people, and the black children of the world. And therefore, it is not the rehabilitation so much of their motives, even though that needs to be worked on to some degree, and their desires, but the rehabilitation and the total reconstruction of the social political system that gets people who want to turn legitimate desires for respect, for acceptance, for love, for a bit of status into criminal activity and self-destructive behavior. But what will they do? Have you going to school, taking a PhD in clinical psychology, trying to figure out the criminal personality, when it's the criminals who are teaching you the thing in the first place. So that you can, and I teach my class now on the black children at risk. And I said, but I'm not going to teach you about black children. What? No, I'm not teaching you about black children. It's black adults who put black children at risk. Yeah, you want me to give you a whole list of symptoms and behavioral problems in black children. And you want to get a degree in social work and all the other degrees. And you want to sit behind a desk and work one-on-one with them all day long. And when you say one or two, you think you've done something when hundreds and thousands are going over the edge. I'm not going to do it. Because the problem is not in those children. The problem is in the adults. And the problem ultimately is in a political social system. And that the most effective social worker and psychologist is that social worker and psychologist and teacher and whatever other professional you may call it that is involved in massive political change. If you change the political nature of this society and of this world, you save black children by the hundreds and by the thousands, and not one-on-one, and literally treating their symptoms and putting them back out in the war to be destroyed again. And what did he say further? What is the nature of a society that would limit their options to fighting and possibly dying as the only way to make their dreams come true? I state in black-on-black violence that it is not so much the drug addict who needs to be detoxified. It is the pusher who needs to be detoxified of the American dream. For it is his addiction to the American dream that moves him to pushing of the drug and the addicting of other people. Understand? And people then are sold dreams. And so then we are sold the dream to be the best that you can be respected, be the best in your peer group. And how do you do that? You do it then by destroying other people or killing yourself. What social contract says that those who fight for freedom and democracy abroad are not entitled to enjoy it at home?